Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Exceeding Your Benchmark. Today, we're going to be talking about how can cell and gene manufacturers scale to meet demand. This is a podcast brought to you by Benchmark Products, and I am joined today by Sumit Verma, who's the Senior Vice President, Global Strategic Manufacturing at Iovance Biotherapeutics. And today, we're going to be talking about some of the challenges that new biopharma startups face, the demand for cell and gene therapies, and just so much more. You'll get all of it in today's podcast. Sumit, welcome.
Thank you so much, Gabby. It's great to be here today.
Of course. Well, to start off, let's go ahead and give your name, a title, and just what it is you do in your industry so we can give our audience just a little bit of background.
Sure, Gabby. Thank you so much. So I've had the privilege to serve as Senior Vice President for Global Strategic Manufacturing at Iovance Biotherapeutics. It's been a very interesting journey for me, supporting one very unique cell and gene therapy company that's focused on pioneering treatments for cancer. Our focus area is towards targeted infiltrated lymphocytes, and we're working to be the world's leader in innovating and delivering this product for treatment of cancers ranging from melanoma, which is skin cancer, all the way to non-smoking small cell lung cancer. So I started as a team of one in the manufacturing team, and fortunately have been able to build a brand new facility out in Philadelphia, and also built a team from scratch all the way to about 200 colleagues at Philadelphia. And our company has grown pretty tremendously. We have about 500 colleagues who are spending a significant amount of time working through our clinical programs, our product pipeline, and also getting ready for commercialization of this product once we get FDA approval. So it's been a very exciting journey over the past 4 years. And for me, the biggest piece is the patient centricity element. Our teams are working in a very collaborative environment to make sure that we create a forum to allow us to innovate and deliver products for patients with cancer, and also ensure that the next generation of products are being developed for this very unique personalized therapy.
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that brief bio, because even just you describing it, there seemed to be potential for a lot of challenges, right, as you're doing this startup. And, what are some of the biggest challenges that new biopharma startups happen to have from your experience?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Gabby. So, I try to break it into two formats. First and foremost, it is the new wave of drug manufacturing. We are moving to this very personalized therapy and customized for each and every patient. One patient equals one batch, which is very different from how we used to produce drugs in the past. Everything was in large batches. When you think about Tylenol, there were a significant number of pills that were produced. And even in the vaccine industry, one lot can produce multiple vaccines for patients. In our case, literally, we're tailoring it for the patient's needs. And each of these modalities takes significant amount of time and a number of individuals involved in this product. So when you think about that new wave of manufacturing, with that comes the complexity and challenges of how to establish this. I try to break it up into two components, Gabby. One is standing it up and starting up such a business. Big picture, there's no real playbook, right? There's not many people who have done something of this sort. And if I go rewind myself in 2018 and learned about this fascinating industry and how people were developing products in the lab stage to bring this therapy to the market, it was really fascinating, because having a fairly deep background in biologics, in vaccines, and nuclear medicine, it was fairly unique in that sense. So for me, the key elements that I think about how to think about some of these efforts is, while they may not be a playbook, the collaborative nature of getting multifunctional teams together to start thinking with the end in mind of how to deliver this product is fairly unique in the sense of how we get everybody together. One thing that our teams did very well is that we sat with our engineering teams and got everyone's input on how they envision the manufacturing process to look like. We took it from the cradle and what individuals had done it in the National Cancer Institute. In our case, Dr. Steven Rosenberg had spent a significant amount of his time doing it at a research level. And big picture, they were able to do this process in 44 days. Our teams have spent a significant amount of time in the clinical setting, in the research labs, and in the process optimization. And with all their hard work, have been able to get it down to 22 days. So that just gives you the elements of how collaborative efforts can make a change and bring these transformational products into the market sooner. Last but not least, starting up is a significant amount of challenge too. You have to think about all the different requirements that are needed to get these products validated for FDA approval. And our team spent a ton of time thinking from the very get go, how do you train technicians? Where do you get this kind of talent? Ultimately, what are the product requirements for validation? And putting up that upfront effort in the planning definitely made the execution much easier for us. So that was just some of the areas that, as we think about the challenges in the overall business, we also took the time to make sure we had a good footprint and roadmap that suffices us as we work through some of these efforts.
Well, Sumit, the demand for cell and gene therapies, it's only expected to just continue to grow through the future. How are established CGT manufacturers preparing for this demand? How can they meet it?
Yeah, I think most players are focusing on three big things. One is around scalability. The second one is around supply chain, making sure we have all the components. And last is about talent. Certainly, this is a growing industry, and I'll start with the talent piece first. There are not many people who have advanced programs for therapeutic manufacturing today. So there's a lot of synergies, and the big pharma have done a great job establishing and developing programs that are very supportive of their launch plans and their scalable efforts. And we're seeing the need to do that in cell and gene therapy. So our teams are focused on making sure that talent, both from a recruitment and a training aspect, are captured. From a supply chain, certainly there are a lot of vulnerabilities as you think about this one patient equals one batch. And the pandemic didn't really help us in terms of establishing a good footprint for all these efforts. There were lots of vulnerabilities and single and sole sourcing issues that came about that exposed the need to make sure companies are thinking long term. In our case, as we think about autologous cell therapies, our focus has been to partner with the right vendors and make sure long term we're not just thinking about what we need today, but putting the roadmap for as we build capacity, do we have all these supply chain elements figured out? And fortunately, we have a very strong team, heavily focused, working with the vendors of choice, working with partners that allow us to scale up very quickly. Last, Gabby, as I mentioned on the scalability side, as you think about some of these products, it's a fairly significant cost. You can't build safety stock. It's an autologous product where somebody's blood or patient tumors or marrow are coming into a centralized manufacturing and very quickly turn around to take it back to the patient and intravenously introduce it. So as you think about some of the elements that we just lack today, I can't build a big safety inventory stock. So the element of scalability becomes very critical for our efforts, making sure that we have adequate clean rooms, we have adequate supplies, and ultimately we have adequate people that can achieve this capacity over time, because then it becomes a cost element and you have to be very thoughtful on how you go about executing these things.
Well, with this growth comes a significant expansion in manufacturing, right? So, what place does automation place in all of this and the expansion of manufacturing?
Excellent question. So as I think about where we are on that journey, today, as I mentioned, a lot of these processes are starting at a lab environment. National Cancer Institute, most of them were working with federal grants to get things going. So in a nutshell, the laborious work for making one batch is significantly relying on the technology that was developed in the industry. And we have to now think about how to scale it up pretty significantly. And frankly speaking, the only answer is automation. As you think about the patients that are looking for these treatments, just in the US, we have 1.9 million new cases of cancer that are coming on an annualized basis. Just to pick on one, small cell lung cancer has over 250,000 patients that require some type of therapy that's going to be life-changing for them. So now you take it back to the production aspect. These facilities barely can make 5,000 to 10,000 patients per year. So, if you want to think of it from just a capital investment and labor, you just can't support that kind of need with the effort that's needed. So the next piece becomes a huge conversation around automation. And as I think about the scalability aspect of that, we don't really have too many vendors out there today that are specializing on this kind of treatment today. My opinion is over time it'll play catch up, but we have to work with vendors today in order to get it to the next phase of it. The good news, Gabby, that I've seen over the past 2, 3 years is there's a significant amount of investment taking place to produce the next automation to serve this. We've seen growth in everything from cell therapy in a box to automation that is using robotic isolators to ultimately new process equipment that can bring it into closed containers and ultimately scale it up very quickly. So the good news there is over the next 3 to 5 years, I do see industry having the ability to partner with these automation companies and provide tailored solutions for these curative therapies that need this kind of effort.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And, Sumit, how important are just-in-time delivery of therapies, and how does that affect manufacturing and supply chain planning and logistics?
That's the area that we live most in, Gabby. For us, we live in this autologous cell therapy space where every patient's tumor is traveling from various parts of the U.S. to very centralized manufacturing spaces. So that just-in-time aspect for logistics, for making sure the supply chain efforts have been thought through, are critical for our survival. We can't establish a manufacturing footprint and take that sort of risk for the patients when we don't have everything in place. So I'll touch on a couple of points which I think are very critical from a just-in-time manufacturing. First and foremost, it's all about logistics, making sure we've thought through how do we get material from various corners of the U.S. into a centralized site. I think that's where we've spent a significant amount of time of planning. And to give you an idea, as part of our site selection process, we considered that. We wanted to make sure that we have adequate coverage, especially from an airline industry. As you know, just traveling on a plane, anything that goes late or cancel flights has a direct impact to us as travelers. You can imagine for these life-saving products that are needed to be turned around within a very short period of time, those elements are thought through. So that's a big focus area that we have. Philadelphia, where our facility is located, we spent time rationalizing having multiple airports close to the region. So even if something was to go wrong, call it a weather type delay, we would have opportunities to utilize other spaces. The next piece that is worth touching upon is all about supply chain. Unfortunately, as biotech is built, you can't really have these warehouses of materials stored for many years. Just the amount of space required is significant, and also there's a element of cost here. This is where just-in-time manufacturing teams have spent a lot of time partnering with the various vendors and inventory management teams to make sure that you can have a first in, first out principle and ensuring that you can quickly respond to the needs of the patient and consider, what's Kanban systems and having just a just-in-time inventory at your site, but have capabilities to feed it very quickly. So we've been very fortunate in that sense. We've chosen the right partners who support us, and that element from our autologous cell therapy has been very fortunate. But that's not the story for everybody. Again, back to the pandemic, we noticed just a simple thing as pipettes, which become very critical for the operations from just a lab supply side. Not many people were gaining access to that. So we were fortunate. It didn't have an impact to us, but for others, it was certainly a concern.
Well, Sumit, considering everything we just discussed, how critical is it to choose the right supply partners to work with?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I think that's a key piece to this. The vendor will make or break you at the end of the day. As you think about some of these single and sole sourcing efforts, it becomes challenging for small biotech companies to try to do everything. Big pharma has the resources and capabilities to spend energy just because of sheer procurement and volume, right? They're spending significant amount of dollars and hence can take some risks and frankly speaking, get a priority on the list. For small biotechs, it's a very different story. Suddenly, they have a big appreciation that it is for cancer patients. There is an understanding that these are critical supplies, but there are like hundreds of other biotechs trying to do the same thing. I think in our case, we chose to go a different route, knowing that we were limited with resources and we were limited to establish this big footprint. We chose to play in a sandbox where it leveraged companies like Benchmark that allowed us to ultimately get that peace of mind whereby you could call one group and maintain most of your supplies. And at the same time, during opportunistic areas for demand, they have the ability to scale up where we may not have the right inventory space or assign a lot of inventory dollars for it. They're able to support us in those activities. So for me, that's somewhat best practice for biotech going forward, that even though you're a small team and you may not be scaled up at this time, there's a roadmap that you follow through and have the capabilities inbuilt with vendors. And that can be quite a strong saving grace. I generally close with that statement, Gabby, by sharing a quick story about it. I recall when the pandemic happened and we were trying to start up our offices in California, meeting significant requirements to ensure everyone's safety. And you can imagine we were all trying to get the same supplies, from disinfectant wipes to tissue rolls to everything. And at that time, who do you turn to? It's a tough process to get through. And I recall calling a key partner of ours, Don, and just reaching out to him and saying, "Hey, I really need these supplies. What can you do to help?" And he was able to get limited supplies to our offices in California during the pandemic to at least check off the box that we can start up. And that was very, very critical for us. So we got very lucky in that sense. We had these trusted partners that helped us. But that just goes to say that having the right partners and choosing the right supply forum for your company becomes absolutely critical for your success.
Critical and makes a huge difference in success. Well, that wraps up the conversation for today. So a big thank you to Sumit for joining us to talk about these topics that are being magnified in the space. And as always, if you want to learn more, please visit benchmarkproducts.com and look for this podcast wherever it is you get your podcasts at. Thanks so much for joining, Sumit.
Great, Gabby. Thank you so much.